a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause the Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Blackstack Brewing, now in the liquor store near you. You're going to want to go there soon because the Pohlads are going to own this franchise for several more years. My name is John Bonus at Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of the FF.
We have stuff to talk about on the field, and we will probably get to that.
We'll see if we get to it.
But we unfortunately have stuff.
That has not been the main topic of Twins territory the last 48 hours.
We did most of you probably know this, but we did and when I say immediate, I mean immediate reaction to the Pohlad news coming across, and a little behind the scenes. We call this show you're listening to and possibly watching if you're on YouTube. And if you're not on YouTube, why not? I have a beautiful polka dot shirt on. John has, I don't know, some kind of blue thing on. I don't know.
Twin shirt.
Yeah.
Twin spring training shirt.
Don't do that. Sexy as ever, both of us. In addition to this show, we do usually a Monday and a Wednesday show exclusively for Patreon subscribers, which is patreon.com/Gleeman. And the Wednesday show is often either we'll have a guest on, or if there's like real news, we'll talk about it. But we'll often, maybe every other week throughout the year, have a mailbag episode where our Patreon subscribers can send questions in to a special private email and have decent chance of getting them answered. John was like almost literally about to hit record.
Correct. For
the start, 9 something a.m. on Wednesday, for the start of a mailbag episode. And then he goes, "Oh, expletive."
Yeah, I
check your email.
I said, I got it. What's that email subject I just came across? And I open it up and I get 3 paragraphs into it and I go, "Oh, S." And you're like, "What? What's going on?" Yeah. And check your email, Aaron. And then we hit record.
Yes. And right. We each read it like twice. We probably each said something that had a few swear words back to each other, and then John hit record. So if you ever wanted to see people react to tragedy in real time, that's a good, and with very few details, and we don't have a tremendous number of additional details now, but we have some at least. Go listen to that. I think it was like an hour and 10 minutes of us just sort of sighing into the microphone, and I even John cursed a few times, and I cursed a few times, a few hundred times. So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, that is the biggest story until it's not at this point in Twins territory.
Right.
I also, though, I want to say, like, I'm kind of embarrassed for us as a podcast, and also us individually, that the Kelsey Brothers podcast managed to get Jason's girlfriend, I believe she's a singer of some renown named Taylor Swift, on the it
wasn't podcast. Jason's girlfriend.
Oh yeah, Travis. I'm sorry. Okay. That'd be real breaking news, by the way. We could break the internet if we did that. Travis's girlfriend, Taylor Swift, on the podcast before we managed to get Chrissy Bonus or Becky on the show.
Yeah.
And I think now we've lost all motivation to have them on the show, unfortunately, because if we're not going to be first, we're last. If you're not first, you're last, they say, right?
That's true. Yeah, we'll get them in the offseason. We'll have time to kill in the offseason.
That's true.
Twins aren't going to be making a lot of moves.
Anyway, my point is we've put in a request to have Taylor Swift come on the show.
Okay, all right, good.
I've put in a request for Derek Falvey, Joe Pohlad, and Taylor Swift, and I think they have equally likelihood of coming on the show at this point. I said on the field, and I'm not going to get into it, but I mean, like, we'll maybe talk about it later. We'll see how much time we got after we go through our sighing into the microphone for 45 minutes. But, Buxton came back and is playing really well already. Matt Wallner came back from the paternity list. You have Joe Ryan continuing to roll along, having, he's headed towards one of the all-time great, certainly in the Target Field era, at the very least, pitching season.
I loved the effort he put up against the Yankees after the Yankees did not try it and did not trade for him.
Yeah. And then obviously Luke Keeschel, who up until the Pohlad news was the news of the past week or 10 days, whatever. And we'll maybe talk about some of that. But unfortunately, as has been the case with a lot of on-field things, good and bad, over the last 40 years, but certainly 3 or 4 years, or 2 or 3 years. The Pohlads kind of wipe that off the plate a little bit and make it impossible not to talk about them. And when I tell you guys I'm sick of talking about the Pohlads, please believe me. And I know John is too. But unfortunately, to not talk about them is to ignore a massive part of this team and franchise and just the overall scope of the Minnesota Twins on and off the field. And so we're going to get into it here. So yeah, like we said, Wednesday morning, they send out, it was a 247 word statement that was effectively, I think 90% one quote from Joe Pohlad.
Right.
And then at the bottom, just sort of a disclaimer about how the transactions have to be approved by Major League Baseball before they're official. We went through the whole quote on the Patreon podcast. It is, I'm sure people have seen it by now. The Twins social media folks told me it had 7 million views. The one they posted on Twitter. You know,
that's bigger than the state of Minnesota for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. We didn't beat Taylor Swift's numbers though on the Kelsey Brothers podcast. But we're not going to parse through quote by quote, although I did pull a few quotes that I think are, if not particularly relevant, then particularly full of BS or intrigue, let's call it. So we'll kind of walk through some of this stuff and what we know, and obviously what we think we know. You know, it's been a 10-month process, really, after a 40-year process of, knowing what being owned by the Pohlads unfortunately means more often than not. And so the announcement boiled down is that after 10 months of having the team publicly up for sale, because they made an announcement, I think, mid-October, something like that.
Yes.
And 5 months after Justin Ishbia pulled out of talks with them, pivoted to them buying the White Sox and kind of left them at the altar, caused them to have to reset things and all that. They announced via Joe Pohlad quote that they are pulling the team off the market and they are bringing in 2 what they called significant limited partners. And I noted that is sort of like jumbo shrimp, but I get it.
Yeah.
Basically, they're selling off 2 chunks of the team to minority owners. In other words, the Pohlads, and I think they said even, we will remain principal owners of the team, which at the very least means they're going to own 51%. I think it's going to be more than that, it sounds like. But they're selling off 2 chunks of the team to bring in funds, to bring in money at the most basic level. And what I thought was interesting is we've been speculating for months now. There was a report, or several reports going back months, that they are telling people they are $425 million or more now, probably, in debt. And that's on the Twins books. However it got there. There's a lot of different theories about how it got there. Baseball, partially baseball, outside of baseball, whatever. But the point is, they have a huge amount of debt, hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. And we speculated, and it's also been reported by other people, that part of the reason they were kind of driving a hard bargain, if you're being charitable towards them, with the asking price here, and had reportedly turned down $1.5 billion as a valuation a couple months ago, in search of 1.7 or 1.8, depending on the reports, was that not that they expected the new owner to take on that debt, but that from the Pohlad family view, and there's dozens of them at this point who share in ownership, because it's the 3rd generation. From their view, they were basically saying, we can't take only $1.5 billion,
right? Because
then out of that $1.5 billion, we have to pay down 400 and something million in debt. And then we, again, only get 1.1 or 1.05 billion to split however many ways. And they were dissatisfied with that.
I want to just follow up to that point. I also want to remind everybody, when the Pohlads put it up for sale in October or November, or I guess it was late October, whatever. One of the immediate reaction from a lot of the media outlets was sort of, oh, they must be tired of being beat up by the media and by the fans and so on. Like, that's why it is up for sale. And immediately we were saying, I don't really think that's the driving force. I think the driving force is they need cash.
Yes.
And it's one thing to have, we should just call this out because it's something that not everybody understands, right? There's a big difference between being worth $1.5 billion and having $1.5 billion in cash, right? There's a big difference between having liquid assets and overall assets. And the challenge here was they seemed to want to need the liquid cash for something, like to run operations of the Twins or their various businesses or whatever.
Right. You should know.
And-
You've noted over the months or years that they've been sort of selling off other non-baseball businesses.
Correct. And this was sort of the crown jewel. So this was the challenge that they had: is how do we turn a $1.5 billion asset, which isn't in cash and you can't spend it, right, into some sort of cash.
And you can't borrow against it anymore.
Right.
Because you've already borrowed 400 and something.
Well, that's
million.
what I was going to say. One way to do it is to borrow against it.
Yeah, which they've
Right.
done.
And they had done that up to the point where they had a 25% debt ratio against said asset. And that's the sort of thing that makes Major League Baseball real nervous. Right. I wouldn't be totally shocked if Major League Baseball was sort of like, if you're going to keep doing, you can't do this anymore. You can't put any more any more loans against this. You're going to have to figure out some other way to get cash. And the easiest way is to sell it. Right. And that was what we thought was sort of the driving force back 10 months ago. And, so that's sort of the primary goal here from their standpoint was, how do we turn an asset into cash?
Right.
Right. And they failed to actually find a full buyer for the whole amount of it.
At
right?
the full amount that they were asking.
For the full amount that they were asking, fair amount.
If they were satisfied with 1.5 billion,
very good qualifier.
They might have sold it already.
Agreed, right?
Right.
And what we see here, and why they seem so happy and pleased with what has gone down, could not be a better possible solution, is they've come up with a different way to do it, which is, how about we sell off some pieces? So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, so you keep going. Sorry.
Yes, they've torn a chunk off the team, or two chunks off the team, and they've sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't know the exact figure, but what I also thought, and this has been so widely speculated, all that stuff you were saying, and specifically the debt figures. Bob Nightingale of USA Today, Bobby's father, who's been tapped into the Twins for a long time, reported right after the trade deadline that the Twins were claiming they were going to lose $40 million this season. So you can add that to the debt. Now they shed $25 million at the trade deadline, so presumably they are not going to lose $40 million.
I do want to point out as well that when you have an enormous debt to asset ratio like that, one of the other things that is a challenge for running it from a cash standpoint is you've got to be paying back that loan.
Right. You have to keep it alive.
At the very least, you have to pay back the interest. And the interest, a 5% interest on a $400 million loan, is $20 million in cash every year.
Right. So
which is right. And if you're paying back the principal, it's double that. If you're paying back any principal at all, it's going to be double that. Right. So, okay. All right.
And so Pohlad confirmed that. First of all, he made one of the singularly, in my mind, and this is saying something, one of the singularly most full of crap quotes. He gave it to Phil Miller in an immediate interview that was published moments after the news, so it was obviously pre-written. Quotes that I've ever seen in my life, and I'm going to read it to you, which is, after all this discussion about the debt, Joe Pohlad said, quote, "As far as I'm aware, that debt was not a hindrance in this process." And then he, in the same breath, the same quote said, "But with this transaction, we're going to be paying that debt down."
Right. Yeah. It probably wasn't a hindrance. It was a motivator.
Right. So it's the reason they could not sell for, in their minds, could not. I'm not saying could not. They very much should have and could have. But in their minds, it's the very reason they could not sell for a lower price tag, and a price tag that the market deemed appropriate, was because they had a quarter of that price tag or more tied up in the debt, and they just didn't want to sell for that price because they were not satisfied with only making X amount. To suggest that $425 or maybe now $450 million in debt on the books of a $1.5 billion asset was not a significant hindrance to the sale process, or at the very least, like you said, the driving force behind their motivation and decision making on whether or not to sell it is truly one of the most just bold-faced lies I've ever heard in my entire life. And to then immediately follow that up by saying, but we are going to use all this money to pay down that debt, which wasn't a hindrance, by the way, but we're going to take this money and just pay it off. That's
right.
We're selling huge chunks of our grandfather's thing that he bought for 40 million and is now worth billions. We're
Right.
actually, having not done that for 40 years, we've actually just randomly decided to sell that off and then use it to pay down hundreds of millions in debt. But please trust me that it wasn't a hindrance to the sales process.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of the baseline the lens through which I'm viewing this entire situation in terms of taking anything at face value. I know that I'm reading the worst into everything, but also after 20 years, you and I have been covering a team owned by the Pohlads,
Sure.
3 different generations. How can you not?
Yeah, we both started covering this team when they were trying to contract it.
Right. And
right.
only about 6 or 7 years after they sold it basically to a guy in North Carolina who was going to move the team.
Right.
And only the voters in North Carolina turning down a new ballpark proposal kept them from moving it. So,
and by the way, one of the best business things that they've ever done is be forced not to contract it, because they were only going to get $250 million for that. Now they're going to get $1.7 billion for it.
Yeah,
or $1.5 billion, whatever.
So also one thing to note is that Pohlad has made it clear, not in the statement, but in interviews with Phil Miller, like I said, with the Star Tribune, and then Dan Hayes shortly after that with The Athletic, that unlike, say, the Timberwolves, when Glenn Taylor sold them over the course of years, and it actually became a court battle, but he sort of sold it to Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez with like a down payment, a middle payment, and then a final payment, like sort of a gradual go from minority owner to sort of half owner, and then you take over the team. They're not doing that. This is explicitly not the case with the Twins, according to the Pohlads. They're selling chunks, big chunks, but they are retaining majority ownership, principal ownership, whatever you want to call it. And there's not like a path, 5 years from now, one of these minority owners has the option to buy another 40% or something like that and take over the team. Now, what I will say is, if the team has racked up $400-something million in debt, just paying off that debt, yes, it makes things a lot easier in the short term, but it doesn't necessarily change the circumstances in which you've been racking up that debt.
Right.
Now, what could change the circumstances, unfortunately, and this is my biggest fear for Twins fans, is that slashing the payroll to a point that you cannot help but at least break even or make money while receiving national television money, MLB AM money, selling even, a half-filled Target Field, and all of their other, advertisements and various forms of income. I mean, last year it was reported by Forbes, and I guess over the last 2 years, that they made, I don't know, roughly $325 million in revenue. And
gross revenue, right?
Yes. Total revenue.
Right. Yeah.
And they've been running payrolls of 130 million during that time. You tell me the math on how you can lose $40-50 million a year with a payroll that's less than half of your revenue. And to the extent that you're piling up $400-something million in debt. I'm not saying it's possible. I'm just saying my pea brain just doesn't really comprehend that. And my predilection towards not buying what I've been told by this ownership group also kind of pushes me in that direction. We've also heard some, other things, speculation from people who have worked with them on the business side of other entities and stuff. But that's really my fear is, like you said, from their standpoint, and I'll read you another
the one, I will say this, the one way it does help from a liquid cash standpoint is what we just said, which is they're buying that bond. They don't have to pay interest on that debt anymore.
Right.
So, you could, if that entire debt is retired, you could, in theory, say, both to future buyers, right, but also to, those people that run your company. There, we've got an extra $20-30 million, or at least $20 million, maybe $40-50 million in yearly revenue that we don't, or an expense that's going to go away, and that should, free some things up. Now, we are both justifiably skeptical. that
and
that's what will happen.
just on the most basic level. And then you wipe the debt off the books, and then you say, well, 5 years from now, if they sell it, they don't have to factor in the debt from their takeaway, except now they've sold off a third or more of the team, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And so you're going to get essentially the same situation where you're giving up a quarter or a third of the proceeds.
Yes.
The other part of this that I just can't stop but coming back to over and over is, how are you going to, even if you're no longer having to pay interest and principal on that debt, and that's, money, like you said, is sort of coming back to you, that is available to you, attendance is going to go down again.
Of course.
Like, the TV situation is not going to get any better in the next year, because who's going to subscribe to this? Like, I mean, who's going to buy tickets for this next year? And we're actually not going to see, and I know people expected, even last night, the first home game since this news, I think the announced crowd was like 24,000 or something like that.
Yeah, they expected 19,000, 20,000. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people expect it to be empty, and I don't think there were 24,000 people there. But the thing that we always point out is tickets, first of all, when they announce attendance, it's called announced attendance, which is just another way of saying tickets sold versus actual butts in seats. They're not counting butts, or they're not releasing data on butts in seats. All they care about is tickets sold. And the vast majority of tickets sold are sold before the season.
Yeah, 85% is what I've heard from. Yeah, right.
And so the even possibility, no matter how frustrated and upset and boycott driven Twins fans might be, you can't take back those tickets sold. They're sold. And so as you look at the attendance figures over the next 20 something home games that are left, keep that in mind when you think, how are there 25,000 people here? Well, they're not. There are 25,000 tickets sold, and that took place months and months and months ago. I will read you, to your point, that they are the only ones thrilled about this. Them, the Pohlads. A couple other Joe Pohlad quote. The one that got everyone was, "We feel we're the right people to lead this organization," which is what he told Dan Hayes. Yes. Which is, my God. I mean, that's I bet they do feel
that way.
I have no doubt that he could pass a lie detector test. That he believes that. But I mean, my God,
what evidence is there?
I don't. It's tone deaf rather, as opposed to BS.
Right.
But and then the other one was Joe Pohlad said, and he said this, I believe, to Phil Miller of the Star Tribune, quote, "I don't think we could have imagined a better outcome."
Right.
And if we can,
I bet he's right.
flip this around and just view it from their point of view, the Pohlad family's point of view, with no consideration given to the fan base, because they don't give consideration to that. Very little consideration given to like the on-field product or the competitiveness and all that. Just from the Pohlad family standpoint, think about what they did. They managed to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in, capital infusion, cash, probably directly to pay off this entire debt, I suspect. And they didn't have to give up controlling interest in the team, which actually made me think of the reports from maybe 3 months ago, Danny and others. And they actually got ripped by fans because it seemed so ridiculous at the time. And I think this is actually proven pretty correct, which is there were reports that, hey, actually Joe Pohlad would, even if they sell controlling interest, he would kind of like to remain the head of this snake here. He would like to remain in the executive chair, face of the franchise ownership role, even if technically the Pohlads don't have a majority share anymore. And at the time, people were like, well, who would ever buy, 60% or 100% of a team that is for sale because this ownership group has done such a horrible job over decades with it, and then go, actually, I'll leave the third generation Nepo baby in charge of this thing.
Yeah, right.
Well, I do think that was implausible, completely implausible, if they were to have sold the entire thing. But they have found sort of a loophole in that. They have sold a big chunk of it, brought in hundreds of millions of dollars, and guess who's going to be at the top of the chain still? Joe Pohlad is still going to be running it. So from his point of view,
I do want to follow up. Yeah, exactly. I want to follow up on that point though, about they could not have been better for them. But first, let's cover a couple quick sponsors, okay? Before we get on too much of a roll,
we got to pay down our debt
right.
with these sponsors.
And we'll start with the presenting sponsor of this podcast. The one that you're listening to for free is Black Stack Brewing, which we loved Black Stack Brewing, but problem with Black Stack Brewing was it was a little bit hard to find them before. You could go to their tap room, which is near 94 and 280. Great tap room, and they've got all kinds of fantastic beers on tap there. Or you could go to like a specialty store or this or that, but to go and find their stuff. And that was a shame because what they're known for is their beer. They've got some really good beers. The local 755 New England IPA is sort of their flagship, but the Slopes French Pilsner I love. Pull Tabs Pale Ale. They've got sours. They've got all that stuff. They even have THC seltzers there that you can check. But it was hard to find them. Not anymore. Now they've got a brand new distributor, and you can find their beer all over the state of Minnesota, from Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo. And all you have to do is go to your local liquor store and look for those distinctive cans, or better yet, just ask for them at your local liquor store. Somebody will be able to point you in their direction. So stop by Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask for them at your local liquor store.
Our second sponsor today is relevant, particularly if you're watching this on YouTube and you see our respective hairlines. Our second sponsor today is Hims, Hims. Hims, and Hims offers convenient access to a range of different prescription hair loss treatments, which with ingredients that work. They have chews, they have oral medication, they have serums, they have sprays, doctor trusted, clinically proven ingredients like finasteride, minoxidil, can stop hair loss, can regrow it. You shouldn't have to, go out of your way to not do this. Like if this is something you think would make your life better, or it's been bothering you for a long time, no hidden fees, no surprise cost. You just get personalized, real care on your schedule, however you want it. They send it directly to you. The way it works, if you want to get started, for simple online access to personalized and affordable care for hair loss, visit hims.com/Gleeman. That's hims.com/Gleeman. You start your free online visit. They can sort of answer any questions for you or personalize it to the way you want to go about it. That's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman. I'm going to read now. Individual results may vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription required. See website for full details, restrictions, and important safety information. That's hims.com/Gleeman. Okay.
To get back to your point that it couldn't worked out better for the Pohlads. That is one of the things that I've got as an open question on this, because one of the other things that Dan Hayes reported and that we talked about in real time and questioned, and we thought we came up with a solution and we were wrong as we were trying to puzzle this, is what's in it for the buyers on this? Because what we had talked about at the time was, well, they must have gotten a decent valuation on that. And what Dan reported, and I actually talked to Dan last night to find out how confident he was in this, on sort of what his sources were, is that the limited partners that they're bringing on paid more than at least or more than the $1.7 billion valuation that the Pohlads had on that, which means that what they're doing is they're paying full price to get a portion of this, of a company that's being run into the ground by a family that's bleeding cash, and without any path towards major ownership. And it wasn't just me talking about this. I've talked to some people in the industry who took a look at this deal and went, there's something we don't know. There's got to be something for the limited partners in this beyond paying, full price and or above, and just trusting that, it's going to continue to appreciate, which granted, baseball teams generally do appreciate.
Yeah.
Or maybe once they get past the potential lockout work stoppage that we might be having after the 2026 season, right?
I mean, they might also view it. They might also view it as if we can actually affect change in the organization as new people. There's a lot of, Lord knows there's room for growth in terms of fan morale, season ticket interest, on-field product. I'm skeptical that they can, push the Pohlads off their way of doing things. But I do think just buying a big chunk of a major league team, and yes, it's further than the valuation, but this is still one of the cheaper teams available to buy into. 1.5 billion is at the bottom here. And also, if you don't think you can affect change meaningfully, as the new people coming in. And you think the Pohlads, even after wiping the money or the debt off the books, will, as we talked about a minute ago, continue to run the thing into the ground. There is no sort of written out means by which you can increase from, let's say, 20% to 51%. But if they keep running this thing into the ground and they keep racking up debt, they're
Sure.
going to need more money, or they're going to have to just sell the whole thing. So I get what you're saying, that it is surprising, I guess, that they were able to get a 1.7 billion or higher valuation selling
Right.
off chunks, because it's funny. There's two ways to look at that. With a lot of products, if you just buy one of them, it's going to be more expensive per item than if you buy a dozen of them, obviously, right?
Sure.
So, if you buy one piece of pizza, that piece is going to cost you more than the average piece if you buy a whole pizza. And so on that point, you would say, okay, well, they're only buying, let's say 15, 20% of a team. The kind of per percentage point cost would be higher. However, with sports teams, and I'm assuming with all businesses where the majority ownership itself has huge value, because you can actually control the
Right.
decision making.
Generally, you pay a premium price.
Correct.
When you pay a premium price, you're getting control of it.
Right.
Right.
So it's, that part is surprising to me, but
Yes.
I do think, and I'm not saying there isn't some other factor here that we don't know about that will reveal itself
Right.
in time, and we'll go, that makes sense.
Right.
But I do think there are private equity trying to buy into major league team and, NBA, NFL teams. There are all
Right.
sorts of foreign money. There's all sorts of people who maybe don't have 1.5 billion, but do have 200 million and want to have a big chunk of a constantly appreciating asset. And let's be honest, it's also just fun and an ego boost for these guys to own a sports franchise. They can go to parties and people will go, hey, you're the guy who owns part of the Twins. I mean, the Pohlads have been living off that for years.
Right.
I mean, they've gotten business deals because of the perception of being, pillars of the community and all that, but also just because people go, well, they own the Twins. Like, they're such a big
Right.
part of Minnesota. And so I do think it's a little odd, but that again goes back to the idea that Joe Pohlad's probably smiling ear to ear at this point.
Right.
He gets to stay in charge of the team. He pays off all the debt. They didn't give up, majority interest, although they did sell big chunks of the grandfather's, their heirs are now
Yes,
selling
right.
off pieces for parts, for scrap, basically. And so, but obviously I hesitate to, like, I guess weirdly, like, phrasing, I don't know, give them credit for that. Like, I'm sure they feel from a business standpoint, look at what we pulled off here. We brought
Right, of
in
course.
hundreds of millions of dollars and we still run the thing. I don't care if they're richer. Like, it does
Right.
nothing
No,
for me.
of course. Of
And
course.
I'm not saying you do, but like, my
Okay.
standpoint is, if they could be the most brilliant business people in the world, by the way, they're not, and they could have pulled off a fast one on both of these groups. Maybe that's true. If it doesn't help the Minnesota Twins baseball team, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care if they have a bigger yacht, or I don't care if they have to sell their fourth home to pay something up. That has no effect on my life. I honestly am not that empathetic to their situation in general.
Right.
And I only know about them and care about them at all because they own the baseball team that I care about.
Right.
And that I just have so little faith that, regardless of if they view this as a great outcome for their wallets and their family, that it will actually have a positive effect on the Minnesota Twins baseball team. And I don't know how anybody can think otherwise unless your name is Pohlad.
And one of the weirder things about this announcement and the timing of it and the way they made the announcement is they didn't do anything to try and to reassure the fans that this is a positive thing.
Right.
Like, I mean, the shortness of the statement was almost striking in that it was basically patting themselves on the back for what they had owned, and that they get to continue to own it.
Right. It was 247
right.
words, and
Right.
10% of that was just saying how long they've owned the team, and then another 20% was just saying the word community over and over again.
Right. And it would have been so, and I mean, we are talking about this both 2 days ago when we did the immediate and right now with so little information. We don't know who the new limited partners are. We don't know what percentage those limited partners are going to have. We don't know what the role of those limited partners are going to be, or what role or how much power they're going to have. All we got is sort of like a a general statement about, in the new world, we now have limited partners, and that's a good thing in business. And we're like, okay. And also, I mean, in one of the follow-ups, I think it was with Phil, primarily, the primary thing we care about with regards to the ownership on this is, what is the payroll number going to be next year? That is all of the angst or celebration you're going to be seeing, depending on which way you want to take this stuff, is dependent on that number.
And it's, by the way, it's in part because payroll is important. There is a very positive correlation between payroll and winning in Major League Baseball over the course of decades. There are certainly outliers every season, and those outliers get attention. It's like, what does payroll matter? This team won. Okay. But there's a very clear linear line.
Yes, that is correct.
Over decades and years and all that. And it matters. But specifically with this team in this moment, the difference between $160 million payroll that they had in 2023 versus the $130 million payroll they've now run for 2 years, well, we've seen the difference. They have no ability to make any outside moves. And if the payroll drops further next season, there's going to be a direct link between having to trade away or choosing to trade away players like Pablo Lopez or Joe Ryan, or even smaller stakes players like, I don't know, Trevor Larnach, who's going to make $5 million. And that is why payroll matters. It doesn't guarantee winning, just as a low payroll doesn't guarantee losing. But in the big picture over decades, of course, having more money to spend on talent and baseball players and to maneuver and add to the roster at midseason, let alone during the offseason, of course it helps the team. And so that's why the focus is so much on payroll. And to your point,
when asked straight up,
it was telling to me that he was willing to say, we're going to use this money to pay down the debt, which is not the greatest thing to say, I think, to a fan base, but he was completely unwilling to even broach the topic of payroll. He basically just said, oh, that we'll figure that out. That's a front office.
Yeah, we'll figure that out in October. Yeah.
I mean, you could have, like you said, and by the way, this announcement, to describe it as hurried, I think is charitable.
Right.
We have heard from multiple sources that this thing was thrown together at the last minute, that Dan actually reported, Dan Hayes, that there was a group interested in buying the team that has done some legwork on buying the team, a full purchase of the team for over $1 billion, that was getting together that day to sort of maybe get their ducks in a row to maybe reapproach the Twins with some sort of offer, or at least, re-engage.
Try to arrange financing. Right. Yeah.
Right. And they were, I think the word Dan used was blindsided by this statement, basically saying, we're pulling it off the market. We're selling to limited partners. It's very strange to me after a 10-month process that they were just like, okay, put this out on a Wednesday morning while the team was on the road in New York and had lost 2 games in a row. They were, by the way,
sharing no information, doing nothing to appease the fan base. Like, no wonder there was a huge negative reaction to it.
Yes.
Like, throw us anything. Give us some information. Give us any information about this. Something that you can say, the retiring the loan will allow us to free up additional liquid cash. Like something that's obvious, right? Like,
or just some boilerplate, meaningless, empty statement about how we feel this will allow us to have a competitive payroll in the future, or something like that. No, it was none of that. It was the same, just paint by number stuff about leaning on the 40 years they've owned the team. And essentially they've been living off their grandfather's 2 World Series. And I'm not going to sit here and claim Carl Pohlad was a great owner either, but they won 2 World Series. That's now 30 something years ago. And they've been basically just leaning on that to prop them up for years. They haven't done anything in 2 generations now. And certainly this current generation led by Joe Pohlad has done less than nothing. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, so much of what they do and say, even going back to like the note they forced Derek Falvey to put out after the trade deadline, which seemed like it was written by AI, and it was like trying to reassure fans that, we sold 10 players, but it's not bad.
Right.
Even that, I read it and I thought, this has no chance of ever getting anything but the most negative reaction possible. And that's the same way here. And I've just sort of come to the conclusion, they don't care. Like they've been living this reality for 30 years where they've become more and more hated, and the Pohlad name is not associated with the businesses they run. It's associated with being, penny pinching owners of a, flailing team that they couldn't even sell for the price they wanted. And to your point that you made earlier, look, I would love, if nothing more than an ego boost, when they put the team for sale, I would have loved to actually think that we had, or any media member had any effect on that, or any, sign holding fans or chanting fans or boycotting fans or Twitter reaction or anything. But you got to be kidding yourself. They're not living a normal lifestyle. They're going places where people view them as smart because they have money. They're going to places where other billionaires exist. They're not going to places where, once in a while they might interact with somebody who views them in a negative light. And I'm sure that is maybe, hopefully, a wake-up call. But like you were saying at the beginning of the show, I'm not naive enough to think any sort of public or media reaction to this thing is going to matter at all. They're so well past the point of that.
Right.
Like, the morale can't get any lower. Their name can't be more mud among baseball fans, at least in this town. I just don't think they care. And that's one of the most fascinating things, not just about the Pohlads, but about sort of the growing billionaire class. And look, maybe there's something that happens when you hit $1 billion that your brain just sort of, the chemistry changes or something, or on the way toward that. But I really don't understand. You got more money than you could ever do anything with, right? I mean, for generations, you're good to go. You can buy things. You can go start a movie studio. You can buy a yacht. You can buy a baseball team and run it into the ground if you want, right? Why do all that in a manner that's going to make you despised in the state and a laughing stock
you're living,
nationally?
Right? Yeah. Right.
Why not do it in a way that can make you beloved, or at least neutral? Why not do it in a way that you might win and become popular and become, oh, the Pohlads. Oh, wow, you're one of the Pohlads, instead of, oh, you're one of the Pohlads. And it just tells me the power of constant accumulation of money that it must have on people. And my other thing is, just sell the damn thing. Like, why?
Yeah, right.
And it's crazy to me that, like, they wanted to sell the thing. I truly do believe that. Now, I'm embarrassed. I do still believe that they genuinely wanted to sell it.
Oh, for sure.
But also, if you set a price point on a product that no one's going to pay, did you really want to sell it? But beyond that,
and there's certainly evidence that within the Pohlad family there was some split in opinion on whether or not they wanted to sell it or not.
Joe definitely didn't want to sell it.
But we have been saying over and over and over again, they appear to be motivated sellers. I don't think they wanted to sell it because they wanted to get rid of the asset. They wanted to sell it because they needed to raise the
100%.
Right.
And I think that's, the disconnect here. But I really don't, like, just sell it. And okay, you got $200 million less than you were hoping to get. And you pay off the debt and all that. That just means the checks cut to all the cousins and the grandkids is going to be 50 million instead of 70 million. Like, what? We're dealing with such a level of wealth here that I don't understand why you would make your name and your life worse. And it does tell me, just, I don't know, the power of whatever happens to your brain chemistry at that level of wealth. Unfortunately, we're never going to find out. And that's the part I don't really understand, like, just from an emotional standpoint of, why own the thing when you're not investing in it? You're piling up debt. The team's not good. The fans hate you. People are stopping going to the ballpark. You're a laughing stock locally and nationally. You appear on these lists of worst owners all the time. Why continue to own it just because you don't want to sell it for $100 million less than you think it's worth or something? That is the part I will truly never understand. Although I will say that among the Pohlads, the word we have always gotten, and this goes back to the reports from months ago that Joel Pohlad wanted to figure out a way to stay in place as the executive chair. He does like owning it,
of course. Which
I don't know if he has some sort of humiliation kink or something like that, like what that is, or he just feels like it's his toy. Like, I mean, he tried to run.
He might just love baseball, man. Like,
sure, but
who wouldn't want to own a baseball team?
A lot of people, love baseball. You can love baseball in a less damaging way. And I would make the argument that if you truly love baseball and you specifically truly love the Minnesota Twins, you would maybe at the 40-something year mark of your family's ownership, and certainly given what's happened over the last 2 years, you might say, maybe it's better off for this thing I supposedly love and cherish.
Sure.
To let somebody
you love something, set it free.
Yes. Yes. That's so let's run through a couple other just notes on this, because I want to make sure we hit as much as we can, especially stuff that we've sort of heard. So like I said, I truly do believe that they wanted to sell it. Now you can sort of take that and say, I've used the example on the Patreon show. We used to always have a garage sale when I was a kid every summer. And my year-old copy of Madden for Sega, I believe I priced at $200. And in my head, I wanted to sell it. And I remember afterward, as I was packing it back up and taking it in the house, my mom said, "Why would you price it at $200 if you want to sell it?" And I thought, well, I'll keep it for anything less than that. I love it.
Sure, yeah,
and it's like, well, okay, I wanted to sell it the same way they wanted to sell the Twins, but they clearly set a price point that was just not going to be matched. And if we didn't hear reports from multiple places that they turned down $1.5 billion for it earlier in this process, I might have a slightly different stance, which would be whatever price they set, they just couldn't find a buyer. But now we know, or at least we think we know based on the reports, that they did have a potential buyer at 1.5 billion, which is basically what the public estimates have been, somewhere in that 1.4 to 1.7 range. And I mean,
they also had that, but they also potentially had a buyer at 1.7 billion. It's just that he backed out in March. Like, we don't know exactly what Ishbia was going to be paying for it, right? Like, you can see from their standpoint. I'll call out two factors. First is they did have a buyer at one point, so you can see where they're like, no, it's worth it. So people are willing to pay this. They just didn't. He didn't come through, and he went to the White Sox instead. And then you can also take a look at, we talked about this when it happened, when the Tampa Bay Rays ended up being sold for 1.7 billion. I think around the industry, people were just like, well, look, if the Tampa Bay Rays are worth 1.7 billion, the Twins have to be worth 1.7 billion. They're in a much better situation. And I think that's fair, but there's also a fair amount of, it could be that the 1.7 billion for the Tampa Bay Rays is the outlier. That, that never went on the market publicly. That was not a matter of people bidding. That was hey, we found a private buyer that is interested in buying this thing. It's like putting a house, like, if you're on the one hand, if you buy a house and it never made it on the market, you're like, hey, we're getting a real deal here. Or maybe the seller's getting a real deal here. You don't really know what the market price is. Right?
I agree with all that as potential factors, but I'll add one more to that, I think, which is similar, which is with a lot of products, you can sort of trace similar products and kind of build a price structure, right?
Sure. Right.
Like, I don't think this is that. There aren't enough of these to do that. And I guess what I'm saying is, yes, coming into this a year ago or 10 months ago, if you would have said which is more valuable, the Minnesota Twins with a stadium or the Tampa Bay Rays, who have significantly worse attendance even than the Twins and have no stadium, basically, I would have said, well, I assume the Minnesota Twins are worth more. And that may be the case in sort of a general sense, but it only takes one. It takes one rich guy who wants it. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are just more rich guys in Florida or who are interested in owning a team in Florida than there are interested in owning a team in the Twin Cities. And we've, in fact, heard similar things, which is, and it sounds like of the two minority ownership groups that are now coming in, it sounds like one, I think, has been described a couple of times as, quote, an East Coast family.
Right.
Which Boyz II Men used to call themselves, the East Coast family. I'm assuming it's not them because I don't think they've been in concert for a while.
I'm actually married to an East Coast family.
Yeah, that'd be the Vernalises are buying the ticket.
That's right.
I like to see that. You know what?
Boy, if you think ownership is dysfunctional now,
and if you think beer prices are high, wait till they know John's going to be going and they can start to. And then the other one has been described as Minnesota based. So it wouldn't surprise me. I have no knowledge of that other than I've heard it's not Glenn Taylor, it's not the Wilfs, it's not the usual suspects that people would maybe hope for.
Right.
It also wouldn't surprise me if there was nobody willing to pony up 1.7 or 1.8 billion locally, but there is someone who either didn't have the means for that, but does have the means for 300 million, or just didn't view it as worth that, but says, you know what, let me get my foot in the door here. Let me get a chunk for 300 million. And I know it's absurd to be talking about 300 million as if it's such little, but in this context, it is pretty little. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's a factor, but so yeah, I don't think it's quite like this is worth this, so then this is worth this, because you're looking for one buyer. It's not like it's not like you put it on eBay and you let the market just sort of determine it. You got to have one guy come forward and give you $1.5 billion. And I guess it wouldn't shock me if, for whatever reason, geographically, circumstances, somebody just likes living in Florida or something, someone goes, I'll pay you 1.7 for it, versus them not being able to get that for the Twins. But going back to, so again, I do believe in their hearts they wanted to sell this, but here's what I will say. I am ashamed to have believed they were going to sell it in retrospect, given how this played out.
Yeah.
I think that it's clear now that for at least Joe Pohlad, remaining at the helm was hugely important. And it wouldn't shock me if that affected their negotiations and their overall motivation and, just sort of their flexibility on various offers or, anything along those lines. If in his heart of hearts, like you said, he loves baseball, he loves the Twins, he views this as his destiny, sort of. He was born on third base. He thought he hit a triple, and he thinks owning the Twins is going to get that 90 feet so he can score a run, basically. And it wouldn't surprise me. It's his toy. And look, I know a lot of this is going to come across as like overly mean towards the Pohlads. I have no problem with Joe Pohlad as a person. Everything I have heard about Joe Pohlad, and frankly, most of the Pohlads, from a personal standpoint, how they treat employees, how they've treated me. And Lord knows over the last 20 years, I've written and said almost nothing kind about their management of the team. But what I've rarely tried to do or tried to avoid is saying anything about them personally. I have no problem with him. He's a super nice guy, all that stuff. In a different context, I'm sure he's great. But in this context, he's out of his depth, in my opinion. And I think that's been proven over the years, not just with him, but with the family. And also he's been put in charge of other businesses and they failed, including a media business, which was multiple radio stations locally, which then took the Twins, put it on that radio station and still sold for pennies on the dollar when they, crashed all of it. And so I feel silly now in retrospect. And maybe they were at the 1 yard line.
For believing that this would happen.
Yes. And maybe they were at the 1 yard line with Ishbia, and maybe that they would have sold if he would have not preferred the White Sox and he lives in Chicago or Chicagoland area.
Right.
But just in general, I feel silly. The hope is kind of what hurts, that I let myself think that sight unseen, I was among, and I'm sure you're the same, and many Twins fans, most, I'll even go as far as to say, were willing to open door number 2, not knowing what was behind it from an ownership standpoint. And that, I think, speaks to 40 years of Pohlad ownership and the lack of faith anyone had in this going forward under the same family being a positive, and the lack of meaningful change they were capable of, and all that stuff, that people were willing to take another billionaire sight unseen. And yes, give me that. And I believe that to be the case.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel silly now for kind of getting my hopes up that door number 2 was ever really going to be opened. What I feel like now is for 10 months, they hung the carrot. They dangled the carrot of, hey, new owners, we're leaving. We'll get out. We know when to leave a party. And they dangled that in front of the Twins fan base. And in a weird way, it did sort of calm the restlessness or anger for a while, because I do think
maybe
there was an aspect of it. Believe me, people were not pro Pohlad over the last 10 months, but there was part of it. It was like, at least we're almost done with these guys, right? Like any day now.
Right. Yeah.
And the fact that now that carrot has fallen to the ground with a thud, that window has been shut, that door number 2 has been, barricaded, basically. I just feel,
well, I mean, that's why you're seeing the emotional reaction you're seeing, right? I mean, the overwhelmingly negative reaction that we have seen play out in social media, and I mean, at the game last night, talking to people, etc., was based on the fact that, there was some hope that things were going to change, that how this organization was run and how much was being invested in it was going to change up somehow, that we were going to try and, instead of, constantly sort of kneecapping ourselves whenever we see some momentum or we see a real growth strategy, we instead end up with the negative side of that. We end up with a constantly shrinking strategy, which I think we're going to get to here in a second. Like, that's the big concern, is that what we're going to see is a further shrinking strategy. But seeing it go from what we hoped to be to what we saw, which is really ultimately what we heard was no change, right? No change. It's going to be the same, which we could have said at any time over the last few years. But the fact that there was a possibility of change, something that we've all been waiting for, and now that has been taken away. And, I think we also probably talk as we kind of get in the latter half of this topic, how soon until we go through something similar? If they continue to bleed money and they continue to have to find some ways to raise cash at some point, what are we just going to go through this same process again in like 3 to 5 years?
Or are they going to, in order to avoid bleeding money again, are they just going to slash their expenses, meaning payroll largely, to such a level that it is impossible to lose money with, the 28th payroll in the league at 90 million?
All right. Let's use that as a teaser while we go to our sponsors real quick.
So this is actually an apt sponsor for the show, which is BetterHelp.
Right.
At an emotional time, like John said, the way BetterHelp works is if you want to talk to someone about something that has been bothering you or something you think you need help with, just in general, a lot of times there's kind of barriers for entry there. There's speed bumps there, and you don't want that, because if you wake up one day and think, I'd like to talk to someone about this issue, and it's difficult to set it up that day or to get the ball rolling that day, it's very easy to then just go, forget it. And then months pass and you haven't changed a thing, and you're maybe in a worse spot. With BetterHelp, they can set you up with real licensed therapists, typically within days. They can also tailor it to what you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video chat, you do it. If you don't want to be on camera, you do a phone call. I'm a person who hates phone calls. I would do a live chat where you're just typing. They can set it up tailored to not only your issue, but your level of comfort in the communication style that you're going to do it. And we have a deal for our listeners. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month if they go to betterhelp.com/Gleeman. That's better, HELP, betterhelp.com/Gleeman. And then our last sponsor,
Factor Form. I've got to tell you, I would have openly mocked myself for thinking I could like something that is vegetable based as a supplement. It's almost feels like a satire, but the truth is that I've tried this Factor Form stuff and I like it. You have to be careful about how much caffeine I have in the morning, and so I've been trying to experiment with some different, various energy drinks. This is one that's, a vegetable-based energy drink. It's just a green powder. Daily Greens is a green powder by Factor Form, and you look forward to drinking it. Just one scoop delivers 100% of your daily nutrients, filling nutrient gaps, supporting whole body health, and helping you feel your best. It also kind of gets me going in the morning. Like I've enjoyed it, and the best part about it, made from real vegetables, of course, but the best part about it is it tastes good. Like it's in a blind taste test, Daily Greens ranked #1 in taste, texture, and aroma, beating out the biggest names in the industry. And as a guy who has never been a huge fan of vegetables, Aaron Gleeman, I can tell you, if I like it, you're probably going to like it.
Who are you talking to? Huge fan of vegetables. I'm Mr. Vegetable over here.
I am not Mr. Vegetable.
No,
so
I'm not.
I would just encourage you to start your day right with Daily Greens Factor Form at factorform.com/Gleeman to get 40% off plus free shipping on your first order. That's Factor Form, factorform.com/Gleeman for 40% off plus free shipping. Factorform.com/Gleeman. I think if you try it, you're going to surprise yourself. You're going to really like it.
Okay, let's dive back into the stuff we haven't gotten to yet. But okay. So a couple things. One, I might have mentioned this, but Dan's article specifically reported that the minimum they're selling off, he knows it to be at least 20%. Now, I don't know that means 20% from each of the two minority groups, 20% total, but the math here is fairly simple. And that's why I've been just of the opinion that I'm going to guess it's at least 25 to 30% total, which is basically 25% pays off the debt.
Right.
If you assume that it's a 1.7 billion valuation in their mind,
right. Yep.
Or maybe slightly higher than that, obviously, like we said, 25% of that is 425 million or 440 million, whatever it is at this point after this season. And that pays off the debt. Well, based on just what we know about the debt and what Pohlad said, where he basically admitted we're going to use this to pay off the debt. I don't know that they're going to pay 100% of it. I can't say that with certainty, but it's clear that this was intended as sort of a direct transfer of money from the minority owners who are coming in towards the debtors who are going to eliminate most or all of that debt. So that tells me it's going to be at least 20, 25, 30%, something like that. That's kind of also what I'm assuming. Just there are lots of, with other teams across sports, minority owners. Often you'll see a player, I think Dwayne Wade just bought in or something to an NBA, will buy in for like 1%. And we talked about Justin Ishbia, who was interested in buying the Twins until he pivoted to the White Sox. As that process started and ended 6 months ago, we learned through reporting that he already owned, I think it was 2 or 3% of the Chicago White Sox. Well, that had been largely unknown until it had been kind of uncovered during this process, because someone buying 2% is not news always. It doesn't, it needs MLB approval, but not in the same public manner that buying 10, 15, 20%. And so that's kind of why my assumption is they're each buying, I would assume, minimum of 10. And I probably would guess that the total being sold is closer to 25 or 30% at minimum, but I don't know that to be the case. All I know is that Dan reported it's at least 20% of the team being sold. You know, like we said, it's a bad scenario just from what we just talked about, the lack of change. And it's one thing to just be sort of in a situation that you know isn't good, which is to say the Minnesota Twins as owned by the Pohlads for the last 40 and certainly the last 20 years, let's say. But you get sort of used to it. Like there's a Stockholm syndrome element where you get used to the badness that you're in. And it's not that you make excuses for it, but like you're used to it. What makes it worse is what you said a minute ago, which is like, it's almost like somebody cracked the door to the room you've been stuck in. Just enough for you to see that there's some birds chirping outside and it's a sunny day and the grass is green out there, and then just slammed it shut and say, nope, you're still in this room. There's no getting out. And that is sort of why emotionally it's so much worse to me than if they had never put it on the market to begin with.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's functionally the same, but I actually would argue it might be worse for anybody but the Pohlads' pockets, because what we now know is they were in such a financial situation that selling off chunks of the team became appealing to them.
Right.
And that tells me, you know, from the debt standpoint, from the, you know, just overall, that they're not in a good place financially to back a normal payroll or even a slightly below average payroll. And so we obviously suspected that, and their actions told that same story. But it almost feels like a worst case scenario as opposed to the bad scenario we've had, because not only are you stuck with the Pohlads, not only has nothing changed, not only did you get your hopes up only for that door to be slammed in your face, but now we know that financially they're in I don't know if it's a bad spot. I'll just say their financial circumstances are such that they viewed needing to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars, which they've never done before.
Well, and that they racked up that much hundreds of millions of dollars of debt to begin with, right, in a fairly short period of time. And so, yeah, that becomes the question becomes, now what? And that, you know, what's different from us is, you know, sort of there is no floor really on what could happen at this point, right? We know that they're in a bad situation. We know that they've, you know, got a temporary reprieve from that bad situation. But, you know, whatever the factor was that led to that amount of debt, I don't think that factor, there's no reason for us to think those factors have changed, and that you know, they're going to continue to struggle with something like cash flow. And we both know the easiest way to make sure that you have a Major League Baseball team that is making money versus losing money is to slash payroll, because you're going to get a huge check from Major League Baseball on an annual basis to cover things like playoff TV revenue and you know, shared revenue and all these other things. And you know, since the number one cost is, you know, your payroll, if you can just keep that down low enough, that's the easiest way to make money in Major League Baseball. It's not to win. Winning teams often cost money. But losing teams almost invariably make money.
Well, and in a weird way, they sort of benefit, like making the team worse from this point forward
Right.
and slashing payroll. They're already at such a rock bottom level in terms of fan morale, and it's going to be the worst attendance in the history of Target Field. Like there's almost like a dead cat bounce element where it's like, how much worse can it get? Like
Yeah.
how much more can fans hate us? How much fewer tickets can we realistically sell? And, you know, there is some significant more drop available, but realistically, they may be viewing it as the team's not winning with $135 million payroll. Everyone hates us as is. We're only going to sell, 1.8 million tickets this year. Yeah, if we drop it to a $95 or $105 million payroll, all those things will get worse, but they may not get worse enough
Right.
to make up for the $40 million we're going to save right off the bat. And that's a sad state of affairs there, where like you're almost incentivized to, if you're going to be bad, be really bad. And we've
Right.
seen that from teams like the Athletics. We've seen that from the Pirates, where they just run these payrolls year after year. And sometimes they win. Most of the time they don't. And at the end of the day, they get, like you said, $250, $300 million in total revenue, almost no matter what, about half of which just comes from MLB as part of the, 30 slice pie of, national TV money, other things, which is only going to grow, by the way. And you just don't spend money on players, and then you just pocket the money. And that's one of the biggest problems in baseball. And there's so much focus on the need for a salary cap, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but there is as big a need, and I might argue a bigger need, for a salary floor, because at least the
Yes.
people who the salary cap would prohibit from spending are trying to win.
Right. Yes.
They have owners who are spending money, and in a lot of cases are losing money. And at the very
Yes.
least, they're trying to spend money to make money. And at the flip side of it is you just have a half dozen teams or more now, of which I'm kind of worried the Twins will just fully dive into the even lower group than they've been in for the last couple of years, who aren't trying to do anything but just sort of exist in the landscape of Major League Baseball and just sort of siphon off the money made by the other teams, get
Right.
their revenue sharing, don't lose money, let the franchise itself appreciate year over year, decade over decade. Someday they might sell it. Someday they might pass it on to their grandkids who can run it even further into the ground, but they
Right.
won't lose money. And that is my real fear here, that it can get worse. And I don't know that to be the case, but I just know betting on things being bad or maybe getting worse with the Pohlads more often than not over 40 years, and certainly over the last 10 years, and certainly over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, especially over the last 2 or
You-
3 years. Yep.
You very rarely go wrong sort of betting on that to be the case. And, as we look forward to next season or just the future in general, if look, they're already spending at Metrodome era levels. And I know that's hard. We talked about this in more depth on the podcast, so I won't review the whole thing, but I know people see the raw payroll figures. Like this year was 140, whatever, 3 million or something like that coming into the year, something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, that's down from 2 years ago when it was 160, but 143 million is so much more than they used to spend. And that is true, just in terms of raw money. But look around you in the world. Everything is significantly more money than it was 5 or 10 years
Sure,
ago.
of course.
I mean, go buy a large fry at McDonald's. It's 3 times what it was 10 years ago or whatever. And so the only real way that you can meaningfully compare payroll decade by decade or even year by year is to compare it to the league as a whole. In other words, what is the league spending on payroll, all 30 teams, and what are the Twins spending relative to that? And I will tell you, having shed $25 million immediately at the trade deadline from this year's payroll, and having shed roughly $45 million in projected payroll for 2026, they now, for back-to-back years, so last year they spent at about 76% of the Major League average, which is to say about $40-something million below the average of the 30 teams. And this year, their functional payroll, after shedding so much at the deadline, is right now about 77% of the Major League average. So basically identical. 76, 77% of the Major League average, which, like I said, is somewhere between 40 and 50 million below average.
Right.
The last time before these last 2 years that they had a payroll that was less than 80% of the Major League average was 2009, which was the final season of the Metrodome before they moved into Target Field. The whole premise of which was that they would be able to spend more and be more
Right.
competitive and all that.
Right.
And the other thing I will say is that year was not an outlier in terms of their spending. From 2005 to 2009, so the final 5 years of the Metrodome, they spent 77% of the major league average,
Right.
which is precisely where they've been for the last 2 years. So
Yep.
they are already, for the last 2 seasons, and by the way, this is coming off their most successful season in 20 years, 2023. They broke the playoff losing streak. They won the division title. People were as close to euphoric as Twins fans get in a long, long time. And we're 21 months later, and now they've spent Metrodome levels in back-to-back years, and we're sitting here with legitimate worry that that's going to be the high watermark for the next several years, that they might go below, Metrodome levels to 70%, 65%, something like that. And first of all, I just think that's pathetic. I already think it's pathetic to spend 77%, but if it goes lower, I think it's pathetic. But setting that emotional component aside, that has real consequences on roster building. And the most direct consequences is you look at the roster. They've already shed Correa. They've already traded Duran and Jax, who are going to get solid raises in arbitration. They only really have 2 salaries on the books for next year. Pablo Lopez makes $21.5 million next year and the following season, and Byron Buxton makes $15 next year and the following 2 seasons. Well, Byron Buxton has a no trade clause and has repeatedly expressed no desire to leave. He wants to be here. He's loyal. He wants to retire a Twin. Now, maybe they could tank the team so much that he changes his mind. But that's a topic for another day. That leaves Pablo Lopez with a $21.5 million salary, and their overall baseline salary, you look this up, after the trade deadline, what'd you say? It's like 90 to 95 million, something
90 to 95 million. And that by baseline salary, what we mean is sort of they're bringing back the guys that we think that they should bring back. They're getting what they should be getting about in arbitration, sort of general figures, right? So, and to fill up the whole team, and if we've got a gap there, we're just putting in the minimum, the major league minimum in there. Yeah, gets to about 90, 95 million.
Now, it can rise from that.
Sure.
I don't know at this point what I would set as an over-under. I kind of want to let the dust settle and maybe be a little more even-keeled as I look at it. But right now, they have 2 guaranteed salaries, Buxton and Lopez. And even if you include keeping, like you said, all the arbitration eligible guys and all that, you really think they're going to pay him $21.5 million for what might be $110 million payroll when they could get value for him? By the way, it wouldn't be a salary dump, assuming he comes back relatively soon and looks okay down the stretch. And then for that matter, Joe Ryan, who does not have a guaranteed salary for next season, he will be arbitration eligible for the 5th time, and then he's again arbitration eligible in 2027, and then he's a free agent. He's going to make like $9 or $10 million next year, and then the year after that, he's having an incredible season. He's going to be able to, and then the year after that, he's going to make like 15, maybe more than that. Again, they could easily trade both of those guys for significant value and cut 30-something million off the payroll. And please do not take this as me suggesting they do that or suggesting that's in any way smart from a trying to win baseball game standpoint, but I just have so little faith that their focus or that they even care at all at this point, relatively speaking, about winning baseball games. I think they're gonna, I fear, let me put it that way, that they're just gonna slash this thing to the bone so that they just can't lose. You can't lose money on it. You're getting so much in and you're not spending any out. And so that's why I would speculate that they will look to trade. I mean, they almost traded Joe Ryan at the deadline. Right. I mean, there was all kinds of reports about that. And we don't know whether or not they would have attempted to trade Pablo Lopez at the deadline because he was out for 3 months with a shoulder injury, which made it impossible to get value for him. I suspect, however, just connecting very simple dots, that if Pablo Lopez had been healthy and performing well, he certainly would have been someone who people were making offers towards them for at the absolute minimum. And that's my fear, is that we're headed to a point where it's going to be Byron Buxton and just cheapness all around him.
Yep.
And it doesn't make
similar to like 2001, Brad Radke, and then 20 other guys that are making no money, right? Yeah,
yes. The other thing, and I really, as we have this discussion, and look, even if they completely shock me and have a $130 million payroll next year, let's say, which I would be truly blown away if their payroll is similar next year as it was this year and last year, which is like 130 and change. It's going to end up being. I'd love for that to be the case at this point. Like,
Right. Yes.
I'm dying.
That's a
for
best
that.
case scenario right now. It feels like,
Right. Because it should not be lost that in 2023, they had $160 something million payroll. And beyond that, if you would have gone from that as a baseline in 2023, which by the way, it worked. They won the division and a playoff series, which they hadn't done in 20 years. It's not like they spent 160, which was still below average, by the way. And they, finished in last place, and ownership went, well, it wasn't worth spending. They accomplished what they were supposed to accomplish, and then they slashed it. But I think it's also worth noting, from that 2023 baseline of 160 something million, if it would have just grown at a normal pace relative to the rest of the league, they'd be at like 180 million right now, because that's basically what average is. So to have 130 next year would be 50 something million below average. And we're sitting here because we got such Stockholm syndrome, and I have such little faith, and I think it's going to get worse, that I'm like, give me 130, I guess, at this point.
Right.
Like,
I mean, all of this, in some ways, it feels like we're practicing something we don't like to practice, which is being pre-miserable about something.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean,
it's hard not to be.
Well, I mean, it's hard not. You take a look at. I take a look at the moves that Falvey made, and I mean, I actually would argue that a lot of that trading away of players, with the exception of Correa, right, was not necessarily a big salary dump thing, especially the trades that sort of at the end that we ended up, really wondering about, like, why did we trade all 5 relievers? Why didn't we just trade 3 of the relievers? Why didn't we hang on to Jackson, Varland? Those guys aren't moving the needle much in terms of salary for 2026.
I agree, but Jax is going to make like 5.
Jax is going to make like $4 million, something like that. But he does what gave me some hope coming out of the trade deadline is I took a look at that $90 to $95 million and thought, well, if they stick around 130, which, like you said, is really the bare minimum of what we should be hoping for, right? 130, he's got some room to actually make some moves, and in particular, if they can figure out some way to rebuild the bullpen on the cheap, which is a huge challenge, don't get me wrong. Yeah. They got some salary there to actually throw at some hitting, which is the problem that they've had over and over and over again to try and handle. But now, with this news and the fact that, like you said, it's not just that, the Pohlads are still in charge. It's also that we now have a better sense of how desperate the Pohlads were when it comes to payroll and liquid cash and that sort of thing. Right. It's hard to not worry that things aren't going to get worse, because we both know that's the easiest way to make money for Major League Baseball, and we know that they need to figure out some way to reverse this trend they have of trend, business wide, not just Twins wide, of losing money. So,
but also, yes, it is pretty miserable, which is one of the things I caution people against. I always say, if it goes that way, there'll be plenty of time to be actually miserable, and that's true here. But not only have we already seen them take this direction over the last 2 years when they slashed $30-something million in payroll and did nothing. Right. Not only have we seen what they've done over the last 10 months and now over the last 72 hours, which we've spent an hour talking about, which I think points to this direction, is just crappy to begin with. This family has done this like 4 different times over the last 40 years, right? Yes. I mean, this is what they were known for before this. And the only difference was there was like a 2 or 3 year window from like 2022 to 2023, essentially, right around there, where it looked like, again, there was a flash of hope, where it was like, hey, maybe this new generation, and they certainly talked a big game. I just read an article that Dan Hayes wrote, and he was just quoting what Pohlad said, but when Joe Pohlad took over and then they signed Correa shortly after that, Joe Pohlad was basically saying, I think a $200 million payroll could be doable here pretty quickly.
Yeah, right.
It's like... yes, could they run $130 million payroll next year? And yes, would that not require trading Pablo? And to your point, could they add a few pieces and put a competent team on the field? And who knows, maybe you win? Absolutely. But that's such lowered expectations that we're now at the point that we're hoping for that, which in itself, we were furious about that level of payroll coming off 2023 to begin with. And we've seen this generation do it.
Yes.
In the last 2 years, slash payroll, not care about the product. We've seen the previous generation do that. And
Right.
we've certainly seen after the World Series where won, Carl Pohlad, the first generation, do that. They ran the worst payroll in the league for like a decade and they didn't win anything. And they tried to sell the team to North Carolina. They tried to let the team be contracted. Then they just decided we won't spend any money on the team, which is precisely what we're sort of predicting this generation will do. And so, yes, it is pretty miserable. But it's not. There's reason for it. Like,
Sure.
how many times do you need to see it before you just describe what's in front of your face? Do you know what I mean? Over how many generations and how many decades does the same story have to play out with the same people, which gets to the overall point of why this is so crushing emotionally? Because it's, I think, not only a dark place for Twins fandom, where the team isn't good, the payroll's being slashed, there seems to be no effort whatsoever made to appeal to fans in any way. And now there's not even that carrot dangling where it's like someday this is going to get better. If anything, they're sort of like repositioning themselves in an even stronger way to never sell the team, theoretically, from their standpoint.
Yeah, right.
And so it's not only does it feel like a dark place for Twins fans and Twins podcasters, it feels like sort of a helpless place, because it's like, if they're not even going to sell the team when they presumably wanted to sell the team and made a big show about putting it on the market, what chance is there that 10 years from now, they're not going to be owners? There's not going to be a fourth generation owning this thing. And that is so crushing to me, just for me, but also just on behalf of people I know who care about this team in a genuine way. And as much as people want to say they'll be able not to, and I'm sure that's true, there are many people, you and I are among them, who cannot detach themselves from this team. It is ingrained in our brains, in our childhood memories, and our lifestyles, and everything else along those lines. And that's why it feels so crushing to me to just be stuck in this same room with one door that leads right back to the Pohlads. And you're like, what can even be done? And I get that people are like, boycott them, stop spending. That's been they're going to have the lowest payroll in the history of Target Field. And all that does from their point of view, because they don't give a crap about public reaction. You think somebody holding up a sign matters to them at all? They for whatever reason, they need money beyond what they already have. And also in Joe Pohlad's case, he wants this as his toy. He wants to run this. I have no doubt he wants to be successful. I just have a lot of doubt that he has any means to actually make it successful. And they're in a weird way holding an entire fan base kind of hostage.
Oddly enough, the hope that I find easiest to cling to is that they continue to run things poorly enough, either the Twins or their other businesses, that they once again become motivated sellers, right? We know that they wanted to hang on to the Twins. It's clear now how much they wanted to hang on to the Twins. But they were motivated sellers not because they didn't want to have a baseball team, but because they did need money. Yes. And there are certain signs that they are going to continue to find some way to need money. So.
Yeah, they can sell off more pieces. You can sell more parts for scrap, and do that. And to the point, I stopped short of making it, but if they lose another, they're going to lose 200,000 or 150,000 off last year's attendance, and last year's attendance was bad. They'll be lucky to get 1.8 million, which is like bottom of the barrel for them. Let's say even next year it goes down another 200,000, which is a huge, significant amount,
right? To
like 1.5, 1.6. That's millions of dollars lost. But guess what? All that means is they're going to slash payroll more. It doesn't mean they're going to sell. It's in a weird way, the only thing fans can do to sort of show their displeasure is to not go to games, which they enjoy, by the way. They love this team, I would argue, more than the Pohlads, certainly, most fans.
Right.
So you're depriving yourself of something you enjoy in an effort to sort of punish billionaires who do not care at all about it. And even if they do feel in the pocketbooks of, we sold 200,000 fewer tickets, that's X number of millions in fewer revenue, that's not going to cause them to sell the team, clearly. All that's going to cause them to do is have a $105 million payroll instead of a $112 million payroll, in which case it's just a never-ending, self-fulfilling pile of S, which was my high school nickname, the never-ending, self-fulfilling pile of S, they used to call me. Or Gleeman, they would call me sometimes. Do we want to even do some non-Pohlad to
No,
wrap up
let's
here?
not. No,
Okay.
let's come back. We'll be back Monday on the Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We will probably be talking about this weekend series with the Tigers. Didn't get off to a great start last night, but lots to talk about from it. And, we'll be back. So Monday and Wednesday, we'll do patreon.com things. Next Friday, we'll have another free episode. By then, I think we will have gotten past sort of the Pohladian news cycle. We'll see.
We'll see.
Maybe, I mean, it's possible we actually learned some stuff of value about this, I doubt any of that will be payroll related, which is ultimately the question. But
yeah. Let me just say one thing before you end it.
Okay.
I don't blame anybody for checking out on this team. I honestly don't. For this year, for the future, this is to me a level of ownership ineptitude that can't help but push customers away. But here's what I'll say. So I don't blame anybody for that. Whether it's you don't care about the team, you stop going to the games, whatever. Here's what I can say from our standpoint. We're not going anywhere, John.
Right, that's right.
Literally, I'm not going anywhere. I want to stay in this room for the rest of my life. Not only are we not going anywhere, but if you thought I was critical or, free to speak about things as is, which I hope you do, that is my goal, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I think even John has been sort of jokerized in this regard to some extent.
There you go.
And so what I will say is we're not going anywhere. We're going to continue to talk about this team on and off the field. When they play well, we're going to say they play well. When they play poorly, we're going to say they play poorly. We're going to view it in what we view as a realistic, sometimes cynical way. And is in regard to ownership, I will never let up if I think they are doing fans a disservice and this team a disservice. And that is the only promise I can make to you. I can't promise that every attempted business insight I have or we have is going to be on the money. And I can't say that every rant I go on is going to be very well spoken. But what I can say is if there is BS that I think needs to be called out, I will call it out until the day they are dragging me out of the press box by my hair. And there ain't that much left, even if I go to hymns, which is an advantage for me. And I know that John feels the same, and I will speak for us collectively, and you can chime in here. We're not giving up on this team, but we're also not going to ignore the factors that drive winning and losing beyond just the players on the field. And if there's something we need to call out, we're going to call it out. And when I tell you I am not afraid to walk in there and have every eye in the place give me a stink eye, please believe that more than ever. And I think John is now pretty much on that side of the aisle with me. We serve our audience, which is Twins fans. And unfortunately, it has become increasingly clear to me that the owners of the actual Twins are not very interested in doing that. We will never cease being interested in doing that. And that's the only thing I can say, whether you think we're smart, whether you think we're dumb, whether you think this show's good, or you can't even stand it. That is the only promise I will make to you, is that we aren't going anywhere and we are not changing in our approach. And I'm still going to view them through the same lens. And if there's BS to call out, I'm going to call it out. And I may even, rope John into the dark side more often than ever.
And we appreciate, we know how frustrating it can be as a Twins fan to watch this. And we appreciate people continuing to come to us to still talk Twins, even though you're having trouble watching the team or watching the games because you can't get them on TV, or, you're frustrated with the future of the team because you're frustrated with ownership. We continue to be grateful for the level of support that we get from those people that listen to the free episodes, for those people that go to patreon.com and pay us $8 a month to talk about the Twins on a regular basis.
Which, by the way, is what enables us and empowers us to speak freely and independently and not having to worry about pissing people off or not having a press pass or all that stuff. Is your support listening to the free show and particularly subscribing to the Patreon show.
That's right. Or even, going to Twins Daily regularly or subscribing to The Athletic. I mean, all of these things we are eternally grateful for the support that we have received from this community. And this is why we know it can work, right? We know what a great community there is out there. We know how much support that Twins fans want to provide for this team, because we see it every day with the support that they have given us. So we do thank you all for listening to this and hanging out with us and talking through this stuff. And we also should probably thank our sponsors who made today's episode free, which is Factor Forms and Hims and BetterHelp. And a special thank you to Black Stack Brewing, who is a presenting sponsor. And we couldn't be doing the free show without a presenting sponsor on a regular basis. So we'd like to give a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. They're now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. So stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room to grab your favorite brew or try something new. We will be back on Monday with a Patreon episode. Hopefully we'll be a lot more baseball focused and a lot less payroll focused, but we'll see.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. And welcome to the end of this video. There's lots more. For another, just click on one of these boxes.
Or click on this circle in the middle to subscribe to all of our Twins Talk.
Thank you.
Cleveland